The morning frost clung to the metal frame as Hauptmann Werner Hoffmann circled the vehicle, north of Caen, France. July 19th, 1944. The olive-drab machine sat abandoned in a hedgerow, its engine still faintly ticking as it cooled. Hoffmann's gloved hand traced the hood's curved lines, while his unit stood watch along the Normandy road. They had seen American equipment before, Shermans rolling forward in numbers that defied logic, supply trucks stretching to the horizon, but this small vehicle, barely larger than a civilian car, carried something more unsettling than firepower. It carried a promise. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The Jeep. Americans scattered them across France like autumn leaves. Hoffmann had watched them race past shattered villages, ferry wounded soldiers, tow artillery pieces that should have required horses. And now one sat before him, keys still in the ignition, waiting to reveal its secrets. His orders were simple: test it, understand it, report back to division headquarters what made this American machine so common, so valued, so maddeningly present on every meter of contested ground. What he would discover over the next 3 days would shake his understanding of modern warfare, not through technological brilliance, not through superior engineering, but through a reality that no German officer wanted to acknowledge. America had not simply built a better vehicle. They had built more vehicles than Germany could comprehend, and this modest quarter-ton truck was proof that the war's outcome had been decided not on battlefields, but in factories an ocean away. The German military mind in 1944 still operated within frameworks that no longer matched reality. Throughout the Wehrmacht, a particular belief had hardened into doctrine: quality would triumph over quantity. Precision, engineering would defeat mass production. A single well-made German vehicle was worth 3 hastily assembled American ones. This conviction had sustained morale even as the Eastern and Western fronts collapsed. Officers repeated it to their men, propagandists broadcast it to civilians, and for a time the numbers seemed to support this faith. The Kübelwagen had served Germany admirably. Ferdinand Porsche's adaptation of the Volkswagen Beetle into a military reconnaissance vehicle had proven surprisingly capable. Weighing just 1,600 pounds, it could navigate terrain that bogged down heavier machines. Its air-cooled engine required no radiator, making it less vulnerable to combat damage. In extreme cold or desert heat, the Kübelwagen continued running when water-cooled engines seized. German soldiers praised its reliability, its fuel efficiency, its surprising comfort across long patrols. Production had reached satisfactory levels. By mid-1944, approximately 50,000 Kübelwagens had rolled from German assembly lines. Wolfsburg's Volkswagen facility, despite Allied bombing and material shortages, maintained steady output. The Wehrmacht distributed these vehicles to reconnaissance units, military police, forward observers, and command staff. For an army that still relied heavily on horses to move artillery and supplies, 50,000 motorized reconnaissance vehicles represented significant mechanization. But Werner Hoffmann had driven a Kübelwagen for 2 years across North Africa, Italy, and now France. He knew its limitations intimately. The gutless 25-horsepower engine struggled with 4 fully equipped soldiers aboard. Its 7.9-gallon fuel tank demanded constant refueling. Most critically, it lacked 4-wheel drive, relegating it primarily to roads and light trails despite propaganda films showing it conquering mountains. The American Jeep before him was different. Hoffmann turned the key, and the engine caught immediately. The sound was rougher than his Kübelwagen, more aggressive. He released the clutch and felt the vehicle lurch forward with surprising authority. Where his Kübelwagen required careful throttle management to avoid bogging down, this American machine pulled ahead with confidence. He drove it off the road, into the muddy field where recent rains had turned Norman soil into thick paste. The Jeep ploughed through without hesitation. Hoffmann engaged the 4-wheel drive transfer case, following the instructional placards an American soldier had left bolted to the dashboard. All 4 tires bit into the mud, propelling the vehicle up an incline where his Kugelwagen would have spun helplessly. He stopped at the crest, engine idling, and stared back at the deep ruts he had carved. This was not simply a better vehicle. This was a vehicle designed for different assumptions about warfare. That evening, Hoffmann's report to division headquarters contained measurements, observations, technical assessments. The Jeep weighed 2,453 pounds, nearly 1,000 pounds heavier than his Kugelwagen. Its 60-horsepower engine delivered more than twice the power. Its 15-gallon fuel tank allowed operational ranges his vehicle could not match. But the report also contained something more troubling than specifications. A question: if this vehicle performs so superiorly, why do the Americans abandon them so readily? 3 times that week, Hoffmann's unit had discovered intact Jeeps left beside roads, not damaged, not out of fuel, simply abandoned when newer replacements arrived from supply depots. American units treated these vehicles as disposable tools, replaceable within days. German mechanized units nursed every Kugelwagen through elaborate repairs, cannibalizing wrecks to keep others running. The Americans discarded functional vehicles the way German soldiers discarded empty ration tins. The disparity gnawed at Hoffmann. He was an engineer before the war, trained in production efficiency at Technical University Munich. He understood manufacturing constraints, resource allocation, assembly line limitations. Germany's automotive industry, even mobilized for total war, could not produce 50,000 Kugelwagens and simultaneously maintain tank production, truck production, aircraft production. Each vehicle required steel, rubber, electrical components, skilled labor. Choices had to be made. Priorities balanced, resources rationed. But America seemed to operate without these constraints. Hoffmann had interrogated a captured American motor pool sergeant 2 weeks earlier. The sergeant, a former Ford assembly worker from Detroit, had laughed at German vehicle counts. "You think 50,000 is a lot," he said in broken German. "We built that many in 3 months. The number was impossible." Hoffmann dismissed it as propaganda, another American exaggeration designed to intimidate. Yet here sat another Jeep, the 5th his unit had captured in July alone, and July was not yet finished. The breakthrough in understanding came not from Hoffmann, but from Oberst Friedrich Müller, his division's intelligence officer. Müller had spent the summer collating reports from across Normandy. German units submitted regular assessments of captured equipment, prisoner interrogations, observed American logistics. Müller assembled these fragments into a comprehensive picture, and that picture was devastating. American Jeep serial numbers, stamped on engine blocks and frame rails, told a story. Hoffmann's captured vehicle bore the number 287,543. Another Jeep, captured by a neighboring battalion, carried number 412,891. A third, seized near Saint-Lô, was stamped 523,107. These were not cumulative production numbers across years. These were sequential identifiers from ongoing manufacturing runs, and they were still climbing. Müller's report landed on Hoffmann's field desk in early August. The intelligence officer had done something audacious and methodical. He had compiled every captured Jeep serial number reported across the Western Front, organized them chronologically by capture date, and extrapolated production rates. His conclusions were presented in clinical language that could not hide their implications. Conservative estimate based on serial number analysis, Müller wrote. American Jeep production exceeds 15,000 units monthly. This calculation assumed serial number gaps for testing, military exercises, Lend-Lease transfers. Even conservative estimates suggested Americans were building more Jeeps every 3 months than Germany had built Kugelwagens during the entire war. Hoffmann read the report twice, then 3 times. He checked Müller's mathematics, searching for errors. The numbers held. If Americans truly produced 15,000 Jeeps monthly since 1941, when mass production began, total output would exceed 500,000 vehicles. The figure was so large it lost meaning. Germany's entire Wehrmacht operated perhaps 200,000 motorized vehicles across all categories, Trucks, cars, half-tracks, everything. America had built triple that number in a single vehicle category. The psychological impact rippled through officer ranks who saw Müller's analysis. It explained so much. Why American reconnaissance units operated with such boldness. Why abandoned jeeps littered roadsides. Why every American infantry company seemed to possess dedicated motorized transport. It also explained why German counterattacks, even when tactically successful, could not sustain momentum. They moved at the speed of horses and exhausted foot soldiers. Americans moved at the speed of internal combustion engines, endless in supply. Lieutenant Hans Becker, a veteran of the Eastern Front now fighting in France, summarized the revelation with characteristic bluntness. "They don't have better soldiers," he told Hoffmann over weak ersatz coffee. "They have more trucks, and that's enough." The full scope of American production became undeniable in September 1944. As Allied forces liberated Paris and pushed toward Germany's borders, Wehrmacht intelligence compiled comprehensive assessments of enemy industrial capacity. These reports circulated among division staff with security classifications that prevented dissemination to frontline troops. Officers read them in silence, then filed them away like medical diagnoses of terminal illness. American Jeep production, the reports confirmed, totaled approximately 640,000 units by summer's end. 640,000. The number appeared in typed military script, but it might as well have been written in fire. Germany had produced 52,000 Kübelwagons. The United States had built 12 times more Jeeps. Hoffmann struggled to visualize 640,000 vehicles. If you lined them bumper to bumper, they would stretch from Berlin to Moscow and back again. If you parked them in formation, they would cover an area larger than Munich. If you assigned one to every German soldier currently fighting in the West, you would have enough left over to motorize the entire Wehrmacht twice. But the number's true meaning transcended logistics. It represented industrial capacity so vast, so beyond German experience, that it redefined what was possible in modern warfare. American factories had converted automobile production lines into military assembly with such efficiency that a single vehicle model, not tanks, not artillery, not aircraft, but a simple quarter-ton truck outnumbered every motorized vehicle Germany fielded. The comparisons grew more damning the deeper intelligence analysts dug. While Germany struggled to produce 250 tanks monthly amid bombed factories and material shortages, America churned out thousands of jeeps weekly as an afterthought, while German synthetic fuel plants desperately converted coal to gasoline. America's petroleum industry supplied not just domestic military needs but shipped millions of gallons across the Atlantic. While German workers endured 14-hour shifts building weapons under Allied bombardment, American factories operated 3 8-hour shifts with workers who earned wages, ate full rations, and returned home each night to houses that had never seen combat. The arsenal of democracy. Roosevelt had called it that in 1941. German propagandists mocked the phrase. "A nation of shopkeepers and farmers," they said, "could never match German industrial discipline and engineering excellence." But Werner Hoffmann, sitting in a captured American tent reading production figures, understood the phrase's terrible accuracy. Democracy had not made America weak. It had unleashed productive power that authoritarian control could never replicate. The Jeep embodied this reality. It was not an elegant vehicle. German engineers, examining captured examples, found much to criticize. The suspension was crude, the sheet metal stamped rather than shaped, the engine reliable but hardly refined. Everything about the Jeep's design prioritized mass production over perfection, and that prioritization had won. Because while German engineers spent months perfecting the Kübelwagen's limited slip differential, American factories simply bolted four-wheel drive systems onto proven chassis and shipped them overseas. While German production planners rationed rubber and steel to maximize output from scarce resources, American industry had resources so abundant they could afford inefficiency. While German soldiers carefully maintained each Kübelwagen as irreplaceable, American units requisitioned new Jeeps with paperwork and waited days for delivery. The mathematics of attrition had become inescapable. Germany could field superior tanks, train exceptional soldiers, implement brilliant tactical doctrine. But if the enemy possessed 12 times your logistical mobility, battlefield excellence became irrelevant. Breakthrough at one point, and American forces simply drove around the flanks. Destroy a company of jeeps, and replacement vehicles arrived before the wrecks were cleared. Fight with the desperation of defending homeland soil, and still watch the enemy advance on rubber tires that never seem to wear out. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The autumn of 1944 brought colder weather to Northern Europe and colder truths to Wehrmacht officers. Hoffmann's division retreated toward German borders, fighting delaying actions that cost German lives for meters of ground Americans reclaimed the next morning. His captured jeep, which he had kept operational through careful maintenance, eventually ran out of fuel when supply columns failed to reach the front. He abandoned it in a Belgian forest, just as Americans had abandoned jeeps in Norman hedgerows. But he carried Müller's intelligence report in his map case. 640,000 American jeeps, 52,000 German Kübelwagens, a ratio that explained everything and changed nothing, because even understanding the disparity could not alter it. Germany lacked the resources, the industrial base, the time to match American production. The war's outcome had been determined not when the first shots were fired, but when American factories retooled from automobiles to military vehicles. The battles merely confirmed what production statistics already proved. Years later, after surrender and reconstruction, Hoffmann would encounter jeeps again. American military police drove them through occupied Berlin. Aid organizations used them to distribute supplies. Some German civilians purchased surplus models and converted them for farm use. The vehicles that had symbolized tactical inferiority became familiar sights on German roads, a daily reminder of industrial supremacy. But what Hoffmann never forgot was the moment in that Norman field, driving a captured jeep through mud his Kübelwagen could not navigate, when he understood the war was already lost. Not lost through that single vehicle's performance, lost through the industrial system that built 640,000 of them, while Germany scraped together 52,000. Lost to factories, assembly lines, and a productive capacity that Germans had dismissed as impossible until American vehicles proved them wrong. The winter of 1944 arrived with the cruelty that defines European war. Hoffmann's division, now designated a battle group due to catastrophic casualties, held positions east of the Belgian border. American forces pressed relentlessly, not through superior tactics or fiercer soldiers, but through a grinding inevitability sustained by logistics. Every German officer recognized the pattern: fight hard, inflict casualties, force American units to withdraw. Then watch as fresh troops arrived in new jeeps, supplied by new trucks, supported by ammunition that never seemed to deplete. Oberst Müller updated his intelligence assessments monthly, though fewer officers requested them as autumn turned to winter. The numbers only grew worse. By December, captured serial numbers suggested American jeep production had surpassed 645,000 units. The climbing figures served no tactical purpose. Knowing the enemy possessed overwhelming material superiority did not reveal how to counter it. Yet Müller continued his documentation with the thoroughness of a man recording a disaster for future historians. One assessment from mid-December contained an observation that haunted Hoffmann. Müller had interviewed a captured American supply sergeant who managed motor pool operations for an infantry regiment. The sergeant explained that his unit received jeep replacements on a scheduled rotation, regardless of whether existing vehicles needed replacement. Every 6 months, new jeeps arrived. The old ones, still functional, were either transferred to rear echelon units or simply abandoned if transportation costs exceeded replacement costs. The phrase replacement costs lingered in Hoffmann's mind. Americans had industrialized warfare to such an extent that they calculated vehicle life cycles like accountants managing inventory. A jeep was not a precious resource to be maintained until it literally fell apart. It was a consumable item with a predetermined service life, discarded when depreciation curves suggested replacement offered better value than maintenance. This was not military thinking. This was corporate efficiency applied to combat, and it was devastating. The contrast with German practice could not have been starker. Hoffmann's remaining Kübelwagen, assigned to his command when his captured jeep ran dry, had been manufactured in 1942. Its engine had been rebuilt twice. Its transmission bore replacement parts cannibalized from 3 different wrecked vehicles. The electrical system functioned through improvised wiring that bypassed bombed components. Every bolt, every gasket, every rubber seal was treated as irreplaceable. Because they were irreplaceable. German mechanics performed miracles of improvisation. They kept vehicles running with wire, leather, and ingenuity. But improvisation, however clever, could not compete with industrial abundance. An American mechanic simply replaced broken parts with new components from unlimited supply depots. A German mechanic fabricated repairs from scrap metal and hope. Both men were skilled. Only one had the resources to succeed consistently. The Battle of the Ardennes in December 1944 demonstrated this disparity with brutal clarity. Germany's final major offensive in the West, later called the Battle of the Bulge by Americans, relied on capturing American fuel supplies. German planners knew their mechanized forces could not sustain operations without seizing enemy logistics. The offensive's success depended entirely on overrunning American fuel dumps before German tanks ran dry. Hoffmann's battle group participated in the offensive's northern shoulder. For 3 days, German forces advanced against surprised American units. They captured supply depots, destroyed American equipment, took thousands of prisoners, and in every captured supply dump, they found jeeps, dozens of jeeps, sometimes hundreds, parked in neat rows, fueled, maintained, waiting for units that would never claim them because those units already possessed sufficient transportation. The psychological impact of these discoveries was profound. German soldiers, who had marched hundreds of kilometers because their units lacked transport, stared at American motor pools that contained more vehicles than entire German divisions possessed. They had been told American industry was inefficient, wasteful, undisciplined. The reality before them suggested something far more threatening. American industry was so efficient it could afford waste, so abundant it could stockpile vehicles for contingencies that might never arise, so productive that losing 100 jeeps to German advance was inconvenient rather than catastrophic. SS Obersturmbannführer Otto Skorzeny's Panzer Brigade 150, assigned to infiltrate American lines using captured equipment during the Ardennes offensive, learned this lesson harshly. Skorzeny collected every captured jeep he could find, planning to use them for deep penetration raids behind American lines. His men wore American uniforms, practiced American mannerisms, and drove jeeps painted with American markings. The operation, code-named Unternehmen Greif, failed comprehensively, not because German soldiers could not pass as Americans, but because they made fundamental errors about how Americans used their abundant equipment. Skorzeny assumed jeeps carried 4 soldiers because German vehicles typically operated fully manned. American jeeps normally carried 2 soldiers, occasionally 3. 4 was abnormal. Once American military police grew suspicious, they shot at any jeep carrying 4 men. The operation's failure illustrated a deeper truth. Germans could capture American equipment, but they could not replicate American logistics that made such equipment expendable. Skorzeny's carefully assembled fleet of captured jeeps represented months of collection efforts. Americans could replace that entire fleet in days. The arithmetic of attrition applied not just to battles but to deception operations. Germany could not sustain losses that America absorbed without strain. By January 1945, the Ardennes offensive had collapsed. German forces retreated toward their starting positions, having accomplished nothing except depleting fuel reserves they could not replace. American forces resumed their advance with fresh divisions, new equipment, and the inexorable momentum that sufficient logistics provided. Hoffmann's battle group, reduced to company strength, withdrew through the Eifel forests in equipment that barely functioned. His Kubelwagen finally died on January 23rd. The engine, rebuilt one time too many, seized during a frigid morning retreat. Hoffmann and his remaining men pushed it off the road and continued on foot. 2 days later, they discovered an abandoned American supply point. Inside, among pallets of ammunition and rations, sat 6 jeeps, all functional, all fueled, simply left behind because American units had moved too quickly for supply personnel to follow. Hoffmann selected the newest-looking jeep, started it without difficulty, and drove east toward German lines. His men rode in American vehicles, ate American rations, and burned American gasoline. They were being sustained by an enemy whose industrial surplus exceeded their own army's entire output. The irony was not lost on anyone. The spring of 1945 brought Germany's final collapse. Allied forces crossed the Rhine, encircled the Ruhr, and drove toward Berlin from both east and west. Hoffmann's unit, now 40 men pretending to be a company, surrendered to American forces near Kassel in April. The Americans arrived in jeeps, naturally, an entire convoy of them, driven by soldiers who seemed impossibly young and impossibly well fed. The American captain who accepted Hoffmann's surrender spoke passable German. He was courteous, professional, and curious about the German officers' experiences. Hoffmann, exhausted beyond caution, asked the question that had troubled him for months: how many vehicles does America possess? The captain consulted a logistics roster and answered without apparent thought. My division has approximately 1,500 wheeled vehicles. There are 90 divisions in the European theatre. Hoffmann did the mathematics silently. 135,000 vehicles, just for divisions currently in Europe, not counting trucks bringing supplies from ports, not counting vehicles in Pacific theatres, not counting reserves in America. The number was so vast it ceased to inspire awe and instead induced only numbness. The American captain noticed Hoffmann's expression. You fought well, he said. Your soldiers are skilled, your tactics sound, but you cannot defeat factories. This war was decided in Detroit and Pittsburgh, not Normandy and the Bulge. Hoffmann spent the next 18 months in a prisoner camp in Belgium. The camp's perimeter was patrolled by guards in jeeps. Supplies arrived in trucks that dwarfed anything Germany had fielded. When Red Cross packages were distributed, they came in such quantities that prisoners could afford to be selective about which items they consumed. Even in captivity, Americans demonstrated the material abundance that had won the war. Release came in late 1946. Hoffmann returned to Munich, or what remained of it. The city was rubble and reconstruction, administered by American occupation forces, who drove the same jeeps that had chased him across France and Belgium. He found work at a technical college, teaching engineering to students who would rebuild a defeated nation. But he never forgot the lesson learned in a Norman hedgerow on July 19, 1944. Modern warfare, he told his students in lectures delivered during the 1950s, is not won by superior soldiers or brilliant tactics. It is won by superior production. The side that can manufacture 12 jeeps for every one enemy vehicle does not need better soldiers. It needs only adequate soldiers and sufficient vehicles to transport them. Quality matters only when quantity is roughly equal. When quantity differs by an order of magnitude, quality becomes irrelevant. This was a bitter truth for German engineers trained to believe in precision and excellence. But Hoffmann had lived through its verification. He had driven both the Kubelwagen and the jeep. The Kubelwagen was arguably a more sophisticated design. Its air-cooled engine, its limited slip differential, its lighter weight, all represented thoughtful engineering solutions. But sophistication meant nothing when the enemy built 12 crude vehicles for every sophisticated one you produced. The jeep was not elegant. American engineers had prioritized manufacturability over refinement, stamped metal rather than formed panels, bolted assemblies rather than welded structures, simple four-wheel drive systems rather than innovative differentials. Every design choice favored production speed over engineering excellence, and that priority had determined the war's outcome more certainly than any battle. Historians would later calculate that American factories produced approximately 647,870 jeeps between 1941 and 1945, Germany manufactured 52,000 Kübelwagens during the same period. The ratio was 12.4 to 1. For every German reconnaissance vehicle, America fielded 12, and this disparity existed across every equipment category: tanks, artillery, aircraft, ships. America did not build better weapons, it built more weapons, and more proved sufficient. The lesson extended beyond military applications. Germany's post-war economic miracle, the Wirtschaftswunder of the 1950s and 60s, embraced mass production techniques that German industry had previously dismissed as crude. Volkswagen, the same company that built the Kübelwagen, became Europe's largest automobile manufacturer by adopting American-style assembly methods. The Beetle, once the basis for military vehicles, became a symbol of democratic prosperity precisely because it could be manufactured cheaply and abundantly. Hoffmann watched this transformation with mixed emotions. Pride in German recovery competed with regret for lessons learned too late. If German industry had embraced mass production in 1938 instead of 1958, would the war have ended differently? The question was unanswerable and pointless. History does not offer second chances for nations that bet on quality over quantity in industrial warfare. The Jeep itself became an icon. American civilians purchased surplus models after the war, transforming military vehicles into recreational equipment. The design inspired countless imitations worldwide. Communist nations built copies. Developing countries manufactured variants. The basic configuration, small, rugged, four-wheel drive, proved so successful that it defined an entire category of vehicles still produced today. The Kübelwagen, by contrast, faded into history. A few examples survived in museums and private collections, reminders of an alternative approach that lost. But Werner Hoffmann kept one memento from the war, a small brass plaque, stamped with the serial number from the Jeep he had captured in Normandy, 287,543. He mounted it on his office wall at the Technical College, above his desk where students could see it during consultations. When curious students asked about its significance, he told them the story. A story about production numbers, industrial capacity, and the hard truth that wars are won in factories before soldiers ever reach battlefields. The number 287,543 represented more than one vehicle. It represented 287,543 vehicles built before that particular Jeep left the assembly line. And behind those vehicles stood the industrial system that could produce such quantities, while simultaneously building tanks, aircraft, ships, and every other weapon system modern warfare required. Germany had fought that system with courage, skill, and determination, and Germany had lost. Not because German soldiers lacked bravery, but because German factories could not match American output. This was the true story of the Jeep and the Kübelwagen. Not a tale of technological superiority, but of industrial mathematics. 640,000 versus 52,000, 12 to 1, a ratio that explained defeat more clearly than any chronicle of battles won or lost. The Germans had sneered at American industry, mocked its mass production methods, and dismissed its vehicles as crude. Then they saw 640,000 Jeeps, and their laughter turned to silence. In his final years before retirement, Hoffmann added a postscript to his lectures. He quoted an American general, George Patton, who had commanded armoured forces racing across France in 1944. Patton supposedly said that infantry wins battles, logistics wins wars. Hoffmann told his students this quote captured everything. German infantry had won countless battles. American logistics had won the war. The Jeep was not just a vehicle, it was a weapon. Not a weapon that killed through firepower, but a weapon that killed through mobility, through persistence, through the grinding certainty of numbers. Every Jeep delivered soldiers to combat. Every Jeep carried ammunition forward. Every Jeep evacuated wounded. And there were 640,000 of them. an endless stream of olive-drab steel that could not be stopped because destroying one meant nothing when 11 more followed behind it. Hoffmann died in 1978, decades after the war ended. His obituary in Munich newspapers mentioned his service, his teaching career, his contributions to post-war reconstruction, but his students remembered him for the lesson he taught about a brass plaque numbered 287,543. The lesson about counting production rather than counting blessings, the lesson that modern warfare rewards the side that can manufacture 12 vehicles for every one the enemy builds, the lesson that Germany learned too late, paid for in defeat, and never forgot. The Jeep survived him. Variants and descendants continued production decades after Willys and Ford shut down their wartime assembly lines. The design proved so fundamentally sound that military forces worldwide still fielded vehicles based on its configuration. But the Kübelwagen faded into history, remembered by enthusiasts and historians but absent from active service. One vehicle represented the future of industrial warfare, the other represented the past, and in that divergence lay the entire story of World War II's outcome, not decided by generals or soldiers, but by workers in Detroit, Toledo, and Pittsburgh. Workers who built 12 Jeeps for every Kübelwagen that rolled from Wolfsburg. Workers who never fired a shot but won the war through sheer productive capacity. The arsenal of democracy had proven unstoppable, not because its weapons were superior, but because its factories were inexhaustible. German crews who tested seized Jeeps confessed this truth to their superiors, though few wanted to hear it. America built 640,000 while we produced just 52,000. The arithmetic was simple, the implications were devastating, and the outcome was inevitable. Germany had entered a war against an industrial power it could not match, sustained by resources it could not counter, fighting with methods it could not replicate. The Jeep, humble and unsophisticated, proved this truth with mechanical certainty. Every time a German soldier captured a Jeep and drove it back to friendly lines, he transported not just a vehicle, but evidence of his nation's inevitable defeat. Evidence that could be measured, counted, and verified. 640,000 American Jeeps, 52,000 German Kübelwagens. The ratio that explained everything, the truth that German high command refused to acknowledge until Soviet tanks reached Berlin and American forces crossed the Elbe. By then, the counting no longer mattered. The war was lost. It had been lost in Detroit's factories, decided by production numbers, sealed by industrial capacity that Germany could never hope to match. This was the confession, not delivered in dramatic battlefield moments, but revealed through logistics reports, serial number analyses, and the steady accumulation of evidence that no amount of courage or skill could overcome. German crews tested the Jeep and found it adequate, nothing exceptional. But adequate vehicles produced in exceptional quantities defeated exceptional vehicles produced in adequate quantities, and that mathematical truth, more than any weapon system, determined the Second World War's outcome. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.